Hey guys, in this video, I want to give you a beginner's guide to mixing with Dolby Atmos for your worship experiences. This is a really cool topic, really innovative. I myself am very new to the concept, but I have started to hear more and more about it, and specifically putting this in use for the church and for the worship mixes that you guys are creating out there. In this video, we're actually gonna talk more about the tech that makes that all possible and how you actually mix that, and then what that could look like for worship ministries. So I'm excited to be here with Sean Deely. He is the chief engineer here at Sweetwater Studios in Fort Wayne. Sean, for someone like myself, who's still very new to this concept, where do we even begin? Maybe I'm a worship pastor at a church or a lead tech director.
It is an accessible format now. There's multiple ways to get your music or performances into the format. We've been here at Sweetwater Studios mixing in Atmos for about a year and a half. So we're sitting here in our Studio C setup with Focal speakers, and we're doing 914, which is 9 surround speakers, a low frequency channel, and 4 height speakers for mixing in the immersive format for Dolby Atmos. And so we have a fairly complex setup, but for people that want to get into it, want to kind of understand it more, there's not a whole lot you have to sort of change from your regular approach to stereo. Being able to connect with a mix engineer that works in immersive. We work on a lot of projects in immersive here at Sweetwater Studios, so we can help take someone's project who may have mixed it in stereo and get it into Atmos. As far as like sort of the easiest way to get into playing around with it, you know, if you are a Logic user, that already enables you to use Apple Spatial algorithms and mix on Apple AirPod Pros or Apple AirPod Maxes. So you can kind of get a consumer experience while working on a software on a laptop and kind of get into it. We have a more complex system. We're working on Pro Tools here with the Dolby Atmos renderer, which is a secondary piece of software. So these kind of mixing rooms are more complex setups, but someone who's working on maybe more of a limited resource to get a mix together can prep Atmos mix, you know, pretty much on a laptop and have something that we can take in here, do QC, and then have a release that, you know, hopefully holds up. But the whole platform to me is something that I think is super exciting. I want to show you some stuff while you're here, but the ability to feel like you're either more inside of the music or more connected to it emotionally. We have that ability, which is super cool. And then from the live aspect, I spent a lot of time touring and mixing front of house. So this is the first time in the studio where I felt like I was almost like inside a venue and back in that space. So the House of Worship, you know, a lot of the live records that come out, and it just, you want to make it feel like you're there inside of, you know, in the church and in the space with all of the people. This is the most amazing format to recreate that for people.
Before we continue on with the video, a quick word from our sponsor, the Worship Ministry School Accelerator Program. You may not know this, but in addition to all the YouTube content we're creating here at Churchfront, we also partner with local church worship and production ministries to help them hit their ministry goals. Over the past 4 years, we've worked personally with hundreds of worship ministries around the globe. We've helped churches navigate upgrading their worship tech, building better systems to grow their team of volunteers, as well as address any knowledge or skill gaps required for modern day worship ministry. When you join the Accelerator program, you get access to our entire library of online, on-demand courses, and you get unlimited access to our team of Churchfront coaches. To learn more about joining the program, click the link below this video to apply and schedule your free strategy session today. Now let's get back to the video. When I demoed the system in here, it probably is legitimately the most incredible thing I've ever heard in recreating music in a normal room like this. And the church has actually been, you know, big on audio and acoustics and sound design and spatial awareness for centuries, right? You actually had these old cathedrals, like, and that was actually sort of, it kind of evoked similar feelings where I've been in a large, beautiful cathedral with insane acoustics, you know, for like an organ and a choir, and it just feels like so immersive. It's just like, oh my word, I can't believe what's going on here. It's a super powerful experience, and of course, again, you're running like you said, the 9.1.4 focal speakers, which is like about as high end of a system as you can get, but it's a huge difference.
Well, and so yeah, a couple things, like the ability to reproduce a venue in the immersive space is something that is really cool. So you can actually capture, you know, a hall or a church that has a specific sound to it, and now you can actually put a three-dimensional sound back in the space. So if you're in a room that is really, you know, historic, you can make it feel like you're back in there. There's been a lot of classical recordings that have been doing that for a while in this format, but House of Worship too, like if you're in an old church that has amazing acoustics, you can capture that and put it back into this format, which I think is a pretty amazing thing that you would really struggle to do in stereo. So that's a really cool thing. And then the consumer side of things, like talking about sound bars and the way that people absorb that is, unbeknownst to most consumers, there's already 2 billion Atmos devices in their hands. So whether you have, you know, AirPod Pros, AirPod Maxes, iPhones, Samsung devices, sound bars, TVs, laptops, there's 8 major car manufacturers. So this is getting implemented into the consumer market, you know, and people are getting this experience more easily, you know, even without knowing it, which is actually great, because if you do a great Atmos mix and it comes across on someone's device and they're like, wow, this feels like I am there in the space, or just even the emotional impact of something that is spatialized becomes a lot more than something that is just stereo. There's a lot of ability to have depth and emotional content. A cool thing about the deliverable too, when we're mixing in Dolby Atmos, is it's at a lower level that we deliver to the streaming platforms. So we have higher headroom to make things have more dynamics and allow to kind of maintain some of that stuff that stereo music has lost over the last number of years, is trying to get things as loud as possible. So I feel like there's a lot of benefits to working in this format, and I think that you know, whether you know, a church or a worship group are looking to put releases out, I think it's a great way to really convey the message and get that to translate to the listener, but also, like we were talking about, getting on playlists and stuff like that on major streaming platforms. If you're not releasing a Dolby Atmos mix, a lot of those editorial playlists on the big streaming platforms are hard or inaccessible to get to if you're not doing that. So if you want to get on the new music playlists and play nice with those, that's you know, that's your sort of into that by mixing in Atmos.
Yeah, I mean, it makes me more excited as a consumer to actually start listening to more of the live worship albums. I'm not even sure how many of them out there are actually implementing this yet. I imagine some of the larger, like Hillsong.
Yeah, Hillsong, Elevation Worship. I was talking to a friend of mine who works with Hillsong, and all their releases are now in Atmos, and so we're doing some local stuff. One of our heads of HR is a musical director at a church we did a record with, and so now we're putting their song back into Atmos. They released a couple years ago before the format was really taken on, and so even, you know, using music that has been released in the past and then mixing it into Atmos is a fairly reasonable thing to do. We use a lot of stems, so like if someone has a stereo mix and they're stemmed out, especially for people using like multi-tracks, if they can get multi-tracks to an Atmos mixer, that can get put into an Atmos mix fairly seamlessly and be delivered as an Atmos deliverable. So that House of Worship sort of already pre-planning to be multi-tracked stuff, so they can use that in the performance-based stuff, can actually yield really easy access to results in Atmos.
Yeah, so it seems like the most straightforward way, let's say if you're doing most of the pre-production yourself for your next worship night or something like that, or Sunday morning, you want to multi-track record your service, and usually anything from an X32 mixing console to, you know, a high-end Allen and Heath or Digico, you can multi-track that audio. Of course, you're going to get all the individual instruments and vocal mics. I imagine crowd mics are pretty important for this effect for mixing. Like, what would you recommend? Like, how many crowd mics, and like where would they place them? Like, you could probably get into some nitty gritty details, but from a high level,
you know, I think a lot of people kind of get scared by the format being, we're talking about 914, 714, different like configurations, but realistically, a lot of this is really expanded stereo. So even still stereo pairs of audience mics, from the stage, at front of house. I've been experimenting with boundary microphones, so effectively like putting an audience or crowd mic at the farthest point like of the room to kind of get the depth of the space. Because like if we're talking about trying to reproduce the space that you're in, we can take those room mics and put them in the back and kind of make it feel like we're in the space, and that's how far away the back wall is. So the more stuff you have, the more stuff you can play with. It doesn't always work. We've been sort of experimenting with different techniques, and so it's pretty new as far as what works, what doesn't work, what the best practices are. So as long as you have something that's capturing audience or the space, that'll be able to convey that feeling. The more you have, the more you get to work with, and the more you can sort of spread out in the space. So
speak to more about the musicality behind mixing with spatial audio. As I was demoing an album here, it's cool because there's that visualizer that we have where I can see the head in the middle of the room, and then you can see the object sources of audio around, and that's exactly what I was hearing. And you'd have like a dry lead vocal like right dead center in front of me, right? And then when there's some like reverb effect, I'd actually hear the reverb from the vocalist like behind me. And then I'd have like, then when the backup vocalist came in harmonies, they'd kind of like be beside and behind me. Yeah. So are there already kind of like best practices, like patterns that you guys are seeing in how you're actually approaching the musicality of that and how you're placing things?
Yeah, and we've been working really diligently on both mixing and listening to most of the commercial releases that come out, sort of polling a lot of engineers in the industry. And so I think it's amazing because we're no longer trying to cram everything into stereo. And so things have their own space. And so there's a lot of elements that I find that's nice. When you bring them into the space, they can just have a spot where they live, and there's nothing else competing with it. And if I have something there, I can move something else a little closer or further away, and it gives things a little bit of space to live in, but it kind of makes you feel like you're more inside of it as well. And so we don't do a lot of the surround sound style of mixing in the beds. We work in the objects, so there's a couple technical components of it where there's a bed, which is a 712 fixed speaker output routing set of channels, and then the objects are the balls you would see flying around. And so any audio output can be assigned to an object, and then that's what moves or where you place that. And so the information on those is what holds the metadata, which reproduces it on a Dolby Atmos device. So those are really cool because wherever you put those, that's what the technology uses to reproduce that on any consumer device. And so when you start getting those, you can do a little bit of movement, but really it's sort of like pulling the music around you, and that's something that I think is super cool. I've always strived to get things to sound wider than stereo, and now that's like instantaneous. I can just bring it in and it feels bigger on the Apple AirPod Maxes, which I think is the best consumer format to experience this in a personal capacity. You get this really great width
now I gotta
thing.
Go spend what, $500? How much do those things cost?
I think they're about $400. Okay. But yeah, and also that is like version 1 of Apple's headphones, right? Yeah. So it's as we see more stuff come out, there'll be more companies that are releasing better and more enjoyable consumer Atmos devices. Those headphones are spectacular, though. I'm quite impressed.
So a couple routes folks can go. It sounds like you mentioned the DIY route is maybe, hey, like give Sweetwater a call if you need, obviously, some of the basics of your recording equipment, and talking about like some of these, if you're trying to build out the actual system yourself.
If you're looking at building an Atmos room, please give us a call. We have a lot of qualified salespeople that can walk you through the different options. I mean, we can, you can do it as cheap as possible. We have really spectacular sounding options that do get quite expensive when you're buying that many speakers. We have the IK Multimedia iLoud stuff, which is kind of like, that'll get you into it sort of at the lowest price point. The Kali Audio, things like that. Focal does have 2 lines that are lower priced than this as well. So finding out, what speaker budget you may have and what capacity you have and how big your room is. There's some configuration things you should work with a sales engineer to figure out.
They can help with room treatment as well.
We can help with that, and the layout is done through program called Dolby Dart, and it sort of configures the speakers and how they will match to the space you're going to be in. So there's a little bit of understanding how to put this together. So we have a lot of people that have done a lot of work in learning all of these things, and so we can help just about anybody at just about any size of room to kind of get this going.
Well, the lowest budget route you said is you could do a multi-track, throw it in Logic Pro, and you kind of have the bare bones of spatial audio.
And the coolest thing is getting a feel for it, because I think, like, what I've found is a lot of the stuff when I'm mixing in Atmos, I have to forget effectively all of the things that I would do when I'm mixing in stereo. So let go of a lot of stuff. There's not really a master bus, and so things that you would do when you're mixing in stereo kind of have to sort of go to the wayside. So if you get a chance to sort of play around with it in headphones and get a feel for it, when you do get in a speaker system or work in a bigger room, you'll kind of already understand how it works together. And so I feel like that's sort of the best way to kind of get a feel for it. Nuendo and I think Cubase both have internal renderers. Pro Tools, you need an external renderer. And so there's a catch up with some of the industry, but as we progress, we see more and more products and software geared towards Atmos mixing.
But then the other route is probably the simplest, is if you already have all the infrastructure in place to capture a great multi-track recording at your church, then you can call up Sweetwater Studios and be like, hey, can I send you the files and you guys do all the magic?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah,
okay.
we would love to, and we would love to help people with that. Yeah. We have great sounding rooms, we have great translation, and that's something that we spend a lot of time learning how to get those mixes to really come together. And so if people are interested in getting stuff mixed, like reach out to us, and we're more than happy to help. There's a lot that goes into making these rooms work properly, so we're super proud and feel really good about the spaces we get to work in. And like I said, we have really good translation. We are able to check our mixes as they come back from streaming platforms, and we've had really great sort of like full circle turnaround of that. So when we're doing work in here, when we listen to it, the stream, it's like, okay, this sounds the same. And so we're pretty happy and pretty confident that we can deliver really great results in Atmos. So, well,
thank you so much, Sean. I feel like I just learned a ton in this conversation, and hopefully you guys do too. Again, this is just a good primer to start exploring this whole space. A lot of great tools out there for churches. So like I said, I'd recommend reaching out to Sweetwater and talking with someone on the team here. If you have a project that you want to get mixed, it's probably the quickest way to make it happen. So check out Sweetwater.
Yeah, sweetwaterstudios.com.
Yeah, sweetwaterstudios.com to connect with them. Hit the like button if you guys found the video helpful. Share it with your friends, and we'll see you next time.